This video explains the rationale and recommendations of the ideal framework, with some help from paper planes. We're interested in how you evaluate new, innovative, complex treatments. Usually with treatments, we're interested in whether the treatment is better than the best we have at the moment, and we want to do a comparison. Sometimes there are some steps we need to do before we get to making that comparison. To illustrate that, we asked a group of people to do some innovation, and what we did was get them to make some paper planes. First of all, what is IDEAL? IDEAL is an integrated evaluation pathway. That is to say, it's a methodological framework for investigation where one type of study leads on to another in a logical sequence. This kind of framework is useful where the subject under study is complex or where it's evolving and developing over time. The pharma industry have had a pathway like this since the 1960s. Their first step is to test for toxicity, the second to find the optimum dose, the third for comparative effectiveness, and the fourth for long-term and rare effect surveillance. But this system clearly doesn't fit for surgery or many other treatments. This is important because the key step in deciding whether to use a treatment is the randomized trial. But if you don't have a preparatory pathway, getting from the first demo to the randomized trial is hard. This is especially true for treatments where the operator has to be skilled and it needs to be customized to each patient. So this includes... There are some tricky issues here which don't come up with drugs, such as the need for modification, for definition of the treatment, for dealing with variations in delivery quality, and equipoise. The video illustrates how new complex treatments are developed and how this leads to unique problems in evaluation. It also provides some solutions which are part of the IDEAL recommendations.
You will see on your tables some instructions for making paper planes. Discuss in your group which design you want to base your own design on, whether you want to do something different, okay? Whether you want to make a few more folds or whatever. Each time you use a new design, or if you change a design, you record it, and you record how it's different from the last time, what you've done. And why you changed the design. That's very, very important. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
On your marks, get set, go.
And this one said if you're looking for distance, the pointed dart is a great option.
Could be, but I think what you're really looking for is accuracy.
Yeah.
And none of them are rated on accuracy.
So if accuracy can't be dictated by the model, then the technique may help.
How many different variations did you go through before you settled on your stable one? 7, 8, 10, 5. So you all had to work at it for quite a while. How often did you test each design? 3 times, 4 times. So if you were a statistician, would you say that was enough? No. Why did you do it so few times? Yeah, because you're in competition. You're under pressure. And did you feel that after 3 or 4 times you already had a reasonable idea how things were going? Not always. No, sometimes you need more time, of course.
Yay!
So, 5. Wow!
Whoa.
Oh! Should we give him that?
Yeah, I think so.
We'll give him that.
We're all urging it.
Oh! Big hand for Stephanie. The participants are working in small teams competing with each other. They're trying to design the most effective paper plane for landing on our target sofa. They are free to change their designs as often as they like, but they have to record what they did, why they did it, and how the new design performed. The students changed their technique frequently to start with, and didn't do statistical analysis to guide their rapid iteration. In this way, they arrived at a stable version of a paper plane quickly. But how would they pass their learning on to others? The very first case, all that's needed in terms of evaluation is transparency and enough detail to allow understanding. So the first in-human idea stage requires just that. The things you need to include are description of patient selection, intervention technique and outcome, detailed enough to allow others to copy you. But what about the next early stage when the new treatment is rapidly changing and evolving? We call this IDEAL Stage 2A, and we suggest that apply a detailed technical description of the procedure and the patient selection criteria and all modifications, when they were made and why, and what the outcomes were. Obviously avoids others repeating mistakes, saves time and money, and prevents harm to patients compared to the traditional approach. Once the intervention is stable, a new set of problems become important. Let's go back to the paper planes. What do the rest of you think about the thrower? Have you all got a favourite thrower? Do you think the thrower is part of the equation? Do you think if you did it 100 times you'd get to be a better thrower? Probably, yeah. So if we're thinking about surgery, which we are, maybe that's a point to bear in mind when we're trying to compare this with something new. I mean, we had a clear winner, and we had two worthy runners-up, and then we had one that didn't quite work. Supposing these were all variants of the same operation, and you wanted to test that operation against the standard operation, would you include all the variants? No. Would you include only the best one? Or do you think you two tables might have got there if you'd had a bit more luck? So maybe you wouldn't want to include the one that didn't do so well, but you might consider including all the others. All the groups now have similar but not identical planes and are still in competition. But to demonstrate the superiority of paper planes over, say, wooden planes, they need to come together and agree a joint definition of a paper plane. So defining the intervention is tricky for complex treatments. There's also a big issue over learning curves. Starting a trial too early, when throwers are still not up to speed, risks introducing a systematic bias against the paper plane. There are other issues where consensus is needed, like whether certain patient groups should be included and exactly what the PICO question for a randomized trial should be. To help get to an RCT from this position, IDEAL recommends conducting a collaborative prospective cohort study and analysing the short-term outcomes, as well as monitoring delivery and evaluating learning curves statistically. Sometimes this exercise will show that you are not in a position to do an RCT at present, or that you need to change the question, which is also useful to know. After overcoming these barriers, we should have a much better chance of a successful RCT, which is what we want to do in stage 3. Once the comparison has established the place for the new treatment, we can then move on to long-term study, similar to surveillance for medications in IDEAL stage 4. Here, registries become important and real-world data can be useful if properly used. But the IDEAL recommendations have value in other fields of evaluation in healthcare, not just research. When you start with something new, like a new operation, it's very often the case that you don't get it right absolutely the first time, and you have to go through a series of steps to get it to a place where you feel it's as good as it can be and it's stable. Then after that, there comes a stage in which there are often several variants of the same idea or same treatment around, and in order to get a fair comparison against best current practice, you have to get everybody together to agree what the definition of the new treatment is. And again, I think when we introduced the second phase, we could see that. During the film, the students themselves made it clear to us that they thought the thrower for the paper planes they were making was very important. And that's an issue with complex treatments as well, where skill is required. It's clearly not going to be a fair comparison if people haven't learned how to use the new treatment yet and you compare it against an old one. And the students in discussion actually came up with many of the same ideas that we have in the IDEAL collaboration. Knowing how to evaluate this kind of treatment is actually quite important and quite useful. Of course, from a scientific point of view, we'd like to know what the best treatment is. But there are also people who run important parts of healthcare who need to know these things. So, for example, people who regulate medical devices need ways of looking at them at the early stage before they're ready to go into a randomized trial and evaluating whether they're appropriate to go to the next stage. There are people who have to evaluate health technology, like NICE, for example, who also need methods which are appropriate for evaluating things before they're ready for a randomized trial. And the third group I would point to are the people who help with NHS commissioning. There are a lot of public health doctors who have to make very difficult choices about what the NHS is going to spend its money on. And again, they are oftentimes in a situation where a randomised trial hasn't been done, and they need good evidence to help them decide whether a new treatment is worth paying for or not. So these are some ways in which IDEAL can actually be helpful to the community. If you would like to learn more about the IDEAL recommendations or get advice on how to use them, have a look at the IDEAL website. IDEAL is conducting an empirical analysis of the effectiveness of our recommendations and very much welcome collaborations. Thank you.